Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Makeup and Murder Mystery. For those of you who know me, you know the drill. For those of you who don't, I have taken two passions of mine, makeup and researching true crime, and I merged them together to provide entertainment for you. So if you love all things beauty and you love murder mystery, this is the place to be. So I like to dive right into the story. Typically, I'll give you a little bit of a background of the characters. I'll show some pictures up above, along with some documents or whatever I find during my research that can bring the story to life for you guys. Okay. This is about a social media influencer from Queens who goes for a jog and never returns home. So today's story starts out with Karina Ann Vetrano, who was born July 12, 1986 in New York City to Ann and Phil Vetrano. Phil was actually a firefighter who was one of the first responders at Ground Zero after the 9/11 attacks. Karina was a daddy's girl. They were very close and they actually went running together every single day. We'll get more into that in a minute. Karina attended Archbishop Molloy High School in Queens and graduated from St. John's University with a master's degree in speech pathology. She was an aspiring writer as well. She had a blog named A Collection of Conversations in Poetic Conflicts, in which she shared her innermost thoughts about everything, from sex and love to the Charles Manson murders, and ironically, even her own funeral, actually. Okay, so what I did is I dug a little bit deeper and I went back to her blog and I found the excerpt where she talks about her funeral. I'll read it to you now. It says, quote, "Have you ever found solace in the thought of dying? Sometimes when I'm feeling really sad and lonely and misunderstood, I wonder if right now at this age and at this time of my life, if by some freak accident I died, what would happen? I think about all the different people from the different times of my life that would attend my funeral." Okay, she was a pretty deep thinker, right? She even starred in a short film in 2013 called The Paradox, inspired by her writings and directed by one of her friends who happened to be a screenwriter. She lived in the same Queens neighborhood as her parents and worked with children with autism in Manhattan as a speech pathologist. Okay, so we know that she loved people. She was full of life and she obviously dealt with some deeper rooted situations, but she was a humanitarian, really. She was kind. She liked to help other people. And I think in a lot of her blogs, she just wanted people to know that they weren't alone and that she was going through things too, but she was still able to maintain her life, which I thought was pretty neat. Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about Karina, I'm going to jump into the story. We're going to start with a quote by her daddy, Phil. He wrote 2 weeks after her disappearance. Okay. He says, quote, "2 weeks ago today started out like any other day. I love you, Daddy. See you later. You too, baby girl. Have a great day at work," he wrote. "A few short hours later, my life would forever change," unquote. Let's get into the events that led up to why Phil Vetrano's life had changed forever. So on August 2nd, 2016, later in the evening, Karina had stopped by to check on her dad before her evening run. They were really close and they typically would go running together. Well, that day, his back hurt really bad. So she just wanted to check in on him before she left for her run because it was on her way past their house. She let him know that she was running in their usual area, and he actually had said, "You know, Karina, why don't you just stay in the streets versus going on the paths that we take when we're together, because I don't want you to be alone in the park right now. He actually had his reasons for that because some kind of shady stuff had been going on in the weeks prior at this park. And so he just didn't really feel comfortable with knowing that she was going alone. She was a beautiful girl, all the things. Karina was pretty stubborn, and despite her dad's concerns, she went down the usual path in the park that her and her dad would go anyways. Now, what's crazy about this is Karina was last seen alive just after 5 p.m. before she entered the park on a neighbor's camera on the house. So she was filmed running past one of the vehicles in the neighborhood. After she failed to return repeated calls and texts from her dad, who was worried about her not coming back because she was supposed to like check back in with him on her way back home just so that he knew she was okay, and she didn't. So Vetrano's father eventually notified a neighbor who was an NYPD police chief, who then launched a search. In the meantime, her father went out to search as well. He actually was the one who found her body face down about 15 feet off the trail into a beaten path, kind of behind some taller grass. Her shorts were removed, her panties were pulled down, and her sports bra was pulled down, revealing her breasts. She was found covered with scratches and bruises. There was also evidence that she was sexually assaulted. An autopsy the next day did confirm that Vetrano had died of strangulation. Her death was ruled a homicide. Detectives would go on to say that it appeared that Karina had been struck in the back of the head with a rock. She then put up a ferocious fight against whoever her attacker was, biting him so hard that her teeth cracked. Her hands were found clutching grass from when she was dragged off the trail. She had been strangled so tightly that a handprint was found on her neck. The DNA of her attacker was also found under her fingernails, on her back, and on her phone, which was found thrown in the weeds several feet away from the scene of the accident. Police officials announced a $10,000 reward for information leading up to the arrest of her killer. However, despite the recovery of DNA at the crime scene, it initially failed to produce any leads, even after being run through local and national databases. Over 600 DNA samples were examined over the course of the investigation, with none of them coming up as a positive match. Additionally, the NYPD checked over 1,700 investigative reports and followed over 250 leads until the perpetrator was arrested 6 months later after authorities matched his DNA to that which had been found on the victim. Before I go into too much about the killer, I do want to say though how tirelessly they worked and how many people that kind of popped up. It took 6 months before they could find a DNA match, but in the process, one of the guys that came up was Michael Fox. He was 47 and he was taken into custody after he was found naked and ranting in the same marshy park where Karina was killed. This was on September 27th, so almost, a little over a month after her death. Fox was apparently agitated and incoherent, and he was yelling that the father did it. I have nothing to do with it, according to a police source. Like running around naked, so of course they arrested him, took him into custody, but Fox's DNA did not match the samples found on Karina's body and belongings. So that was released in October. They kind of thought they had somebody, and that fell through. He was just a crazy person. Days after Karina was found dead, the NYPD increased its reward offered to $25,000. So it was first $10,000 and then it went to $25,000. On August 23rd of 2016, the city's reward was then again raised to $35,000, which included $10,000 from the mayor's office as well. So like the whole city was in on this, and they were really serious about finding her perpetrator, right? Her murderer. Karina's family also went one step further and created a GoFundMe, quickly generating contributions as well. Just one day after the page went live, it had surpassed its goal of $100,000, and then by October 12th of 2016, the fund had raised more than $283,000 and had been shared over 15,000 times on social media, you guys. The power of social media, right? Okay, now let's talk about this disgusting pig, Chanel Lewis. He became a possible suspect the first week of February when NYPD Lieutenant John Russo recalled a complaint from back in May that they got. In testimony, Russo said that he had become suspicious when he saw Lewis wearing a hoodie and sweatpants on a hot day, looking at houses in Howard Beach. The next day, he saw Lewis pacing in a parking lot, and residents reported seeing a similarly dressed man carrying a crowbar and going in and out of backyards in the neighborhood. Russo then called the local precinct, and the officers stopped Lewis. They didn't find a crowbar and they didn't observe any crime, but took down his name and address anyways. Okay? So isn't that crazy? Like how things like this can connect and then just like pop up all of a sudden? And it had really nothing to do with the area where Karina was murdered. So when investigators located the patrol report, they interviewed Lewis at his Essex Street home address. During the interviews, Lewis described a puddle near the location where Karina's body was found, which helped then convince the investigators that he was in fact at the park the same time of her killing. Lewis told police that the alleged attack was impulsive and sparked by problems at home. Lewis then was taken into custody for further questioning, and later it was announced that Chanel R. Lewis, a 20-year-old Black Brooklyn resident, was placed under arrest and charged with one count of second-degree murder. Chanel Lewis was unemployed, lived with his mother and 3 sisters and their children in a low-income housing project in East New York City. It said that it was less than 3 miles away from the park where Vetrano was found dead. So Lewis had no criminal record. He reportedly had a hatred for women and once told a teacher's aide that he wanted to, quote, stab all the girls, unquote, at his school several years earlier. He had been taken into protective custody numerous times, though, and was described as a loner and mentally unstable. Well, gee, you think? He had also had several run-ins with police over the years before the murder, including 3 summons in 2013, 2 for violating rules in Spring Creek Park, and 1 for urinating in public. An additional incident occurred in May of 2016 when a 911 caller reported a suspicious male with a crowbar in the backyard of several homes. Later, an NYPD lieutenant had also reported that he remembered him lurking around the area looking into cars and traced him from when Lewis's name and address had been taken by police during a stop and frisk report. So like he was coming close frequently, but like nothing was happening, right? According to investigators on August 2nd, Lewis had left his home after arguing with his family and walked over to the park where he came across and then attacked Karina. Oh, man, this is just terrible. While it was believed to be like a completely random encounter, it's not definitely known if Lewis had ever seen Karina Vetrano before or not, or if the attack on her was actually premeditated. But His mother recalled that upon returning home that night, he was looking disheveled with his clothes torn. Chanel claimed that he had been mugged by a group of men, although there was no evidence of such an attack to him, and a police report was never filed either. Then the next day, on August 13, it was recorded that Chanel's father, a former school principal, had taken him to a local emergency room for treatment of scratches and cuts on his upper body. Go figure. And also an injury to his hand. Lewis's family, though, continued to deny his involvement in the homicide. His father even claimed that he had not heard or read about Karina's death until after his son was arrested for it. Now let's get into the part that really makes me sick. The actual interrogation. Ugh. Chanel Lewis did confess to committing Karina Vetrano's murder. According to his tape statements to police, and yes, those are public, you can find them, just Google search Chanel Lewis confessions. He says, and I quote, "I never really meant to hurt her, it just happened," he said. "I was just mad at the time. I beat her to let my emotions out." Ugh. Like, seriously? Somebody had to die because you were mad? And here, he said during the interrogation, if you watch the videos, it was something about like a discrepancy he was having with some neighbors that were being too loud at a house he used to live at. Like, what? Okay, so now this is where it gets really frustrating. The murder trials, okay? And yes, I said trials. The first Karina Vetrano trial began on November 5th of 2018. Now, mind you, this happened in 2016, okay? It took forever for justice to be served, all right? And it just finally finished about a year ago. But let's talk about this. So Lewis had pleaded not guilty to murder and sex abuse charges and faced a sentence of either 25 years or life in prison. On November 7th, Phil Vetrano testified in court on how he created a search party to find his daughter's body. 2 days later, juries watched a videotape of Lewis's confession to the murder. The tape had been previously played at a 2017 pretrial hearing in Queens Supreme Court. On November 14th, forensic biologist Linda Rosano testified that Lewis's DNA had a 1 in 6 trillion chance of someone else sharing the same genetic profile. Okay? Mind you, we only have, 333 million people in the United States. So it was him. The trial continues. The next day, DA, District Attorney Brad Leventhal, asked Judge Michael Alloys to dismiss 9 of the counts against Chanel Lewis. 4 counts remained in the indictment. 1 of first-degree murder, 2 of second-degree murder, and 1 of first-degree sexual abuse. The first trial ended with a hung jury, though, due to defensive arguments as well as claims that the DNA evidence was contaminated because her father showed up at the scene and he was the one that found her body. This poor man, finds her body. And I guess he had clung to her. He saw her body and he, turned her over and he saw it was her and he just clung to her body. So now they said that the evidence was contaminated. So it was a hung jury. Then on November 21st, the judge declared a mistrial and tentatively scheduled a retrial for January 22nd, 2019. You guys, a whole, couple months longer even now. So when the retrial was scheduled for March 2019, Chanel Lewis was then found guilty on 2 counts of second-degree murder, 1 count of first-degree murder, and 1 count of sexual abuse. after 5 hours of deliberation. Just 5 hours. Isn't that crazy? The sentencing hearing was initially scheduled for April 17th with expectations of a sentence to the maximum penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole. A few days before the scheduled hearing, though, Lewis's attorneys requested and received a delay so that they could introduce allegations of misconduct amongst several members of the jury that convicted him. On April 23rd, 2019, Lewis was finally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Okay? He finally got his sentencing. What a joke, right? The justice system is just so, I'm telling you, it's just so crazy and so disorganized, and it takes so long sometimes. So following the rest of Chanel Lewis, the family then started a scholarship program for students at the Archbishop Molloy High School in Karina's name, which was so sweet. The community on August 16th, 2016, Vetrano's friends and family gathered to retrace her steps. Her father said it was the first of many events to honor her life. It's also said that the night after Karina passed away, dozens and dozens of people gathered in the parking lot of the bar where she worked to light candles in her honor. So the moral of the story is, guys, don't go running off into parks alone. Have some sort of protection on you. A cell phone is not enough. Okay? I love you all. Please remember to live each day as if it was your last. Be kind, be humble. Never let anyone steal your shine. Go out and do some good in the world today. Bye-bye.